Greetings ladies and mentalchits, and welcome to my channel, where I like to make audiobooks of various web novels. In this particular series we will be focusing on Forgotten Dungeon on Royal Road, and in this particular video we will be doing chapters 6 to 10. I hope that you enjoy. Forgotten Dungeon Chapter 6. Uno. Now, how should I begin my creation spree? First, it's better to check what materials I have at hand, and what to absorb over the last few days. Now, should I go and get my gaming preconceptions on, or simply order my new power around? Let's do it. With all of my might, I simply wished to know. And the system responded in turn. Current resources available: common oak hardwood, common conifer softwood, common low-quality pig iron, low-quality dirt, limestone, sandstone, meat, grey rat, leather, grey rat, bone, grey rat and human, and vegetable matter grass. It wasn't a lot, so you may ask why humans' bones appeared in this list. I kinda decided to absorb them a few moments earlier, and this allowed me to learn that humans were made of, or at least their bones. And while most of the skeletons in my closet were incomplete, I was able to piece together a whole specimen, which I promptly summoned. It took a bit from my reserves, and the manor wasn't that big of a hindrance at all. Under the thrall of my ability, it stood upright, with bones slightly gleaming under the power emitted from the dungeon core. The rest of the room was too dark for sentient eyes to see. As materials I used human bones, and there was hesitation. Not because they were sacred or something, but because I had stronger things on hand. Yet each of them had a distinct weakness. Wood was easy to burn and warp, and metal rusted. Big iron wasn't really good anyway, and stone was much too heavy. And I needed something strong and light. And making a human skeleton from rat bones just felt wrong. I started immediately, first covering the chest in iron, an uneven surface of the metal forming something similar to armor, and completely hidden the skeleton's ribs. And then, like a living thing, the excess flew outwards to the arms and legs. It precisely controlled how much it was allowed to bond with my creature, turning it into a rusty-looking juggernaut. It didn't need eyes, and so its helmet was looking like some third-rate blacksmith tried creating a knightly doll. Since the body was complete, I could focus on the weapon, and I could theoretically create swords and spears, or similarly complicated weapons. These would be pale imitations of the real thing. Mana creation seemed to favor things that I had a good idea of how they were made, or in other words, I had blueprints for. So instead of getting fancy, I went with the easiest choice. A club made of metal with the wicked spikes on the end of it. I finished my job, and in turn the mana receded like an ocean wave, only to see my creation crumple on the floor. Ah, duct tape. It was needed once again. I quickly zoomed in and moved through the something like an iron is not a problem, only to see from inside how it was bonding with the metal and bone, or rather how it wasn't. But there was something in this world called double-sided tape. A real marvel. By using it, I managed to join up both components with force and the new being to stand up. It wasn't large. The skeleton was about 160 centimeters high, a small adult or a big child, but thanks to that I could move through the dungeon without problems, and the first impression was that it looked like a discount knight figure, and one wasn't yet painted, and the kind of people that used to do war games in my old world. Just moved jerkily, dragging a large club behind it and leaving marks on the floor. But once again, I was not yet finished. As the icing on the cake, my power over anima, the chosen and inner truth, swelled and drowned the creature, and it struggled for a moment, seemingly getting melted under the violent currents. The two reddish eyes formed on the faceplate, hidden under the metallic eyelids, as did two small horns, or more like thick antennae. They were flat on the ends, after all. Arms grew more slender, and the ribcage stretched out while bulging to the body's surface. Yet all of that was covered in metal. Fingers thickened, now able to pick up the weapon with ease, and legs grew stronger, shorter, and more robust, although far greater power when swinging. The transformation stopped, and I immediately used Analyze, only to be greeted by a weird announcement. Iron anima touched lesser abomination. Making use of sentient sparks when creating golems and monsters is a huge taboo. Those who create such monsters tend to gather positive and negative karma in great amounts. This never-before-seen race has touched the inner truth and emerged as half machine, half undead being. For now, however, its intelligence is only marginal. In turn, it won't tire nor grow hungry, working towards nothing else but completing its duty. This type of monster has a clear preference for martial skills and close combat fighting. It has no special abilities except for charge, which will allow it to close the distance towards its foe. Like all abominations, it is weak to holy magic and due to its machine heritage, lightning. Threat level E+. Wow, that was a mouthful, so I'll call it Libris, because of lesser iron abomination. It's shorter and rolls off the tongue just fine. The first of the new race simply stood without moving, waiting for my commands. It was more like a doll without any will of its own. For now, I left it in the corner. Since I had already created my first melee combatant, there was a need for something that could be taken care of the fight at range. And that wasn't much of a choice, really. When it came to the base of a new monster, it could only either be a humanoid monster or similar to a rat. Since I already used a human, now it was time for rats, and I had a weapon just for them prepared, all low tech and stuff. And just to be fair, I tried to create biological entities, and they were just that, bags of meat collapsing on the floor almost immediately. Their hearts didn't beat, blood didn't flow, brains didn't work, complete and total failures. And yet, with metal and decaying flesh, I was able to grant them life. Weird. Like before, I was basing the new monster on a biological skeleton, and the thin coating of pig iron coated pseudo-skin and under it, and muscles made up the mana duct tape. After some enlarging, it gained another 10 centimeters, and I sculpted a long trench along the middle of its head and parallel to its spine, with its tail elongated and made more flexible while still full of muscles, allowing for greater motion of range, dexterity, and power. After that, I forced on a little spear on a wooden shaft with an iron head, just long enough to fit into the curved trench. Mechanical rat tail would be used to push it like a spear thrower. The monster used its head as an aiming mechanism. What's more, at the end of its tail, I created a 3-pronged grasper which could be used to pick up things, like, for example, new spears. After finishing touch, I soaked the beast in anima, just like I did with its predecessor, bringing it to full unlife and elongated its tail even more. Now, it was longer than its beast itself, dexterous like a sentient hand, and as a bonus, under the rat belly dangled a small pouch with a few more spears, far enough to not be seen at first glance, but easily accessible for its tail hand. My creation was ready. What did Analyze have to say? Iron Rattling Spear Thrower. Small beast-like dungeon creature created from the basic grey rat. It boasts a much better speed, strength, and firepower, thanks to the iron skin and spear thrower carved into its flesh. Has a pack mentality and tendency to form tribal societies and will help any dungeon it creating in the vicinity defend their home. Will breed naturally and convert some locations to layers. Naturally, evolution is available. Has a built-in mana conversion gland and allows it to roam corrupted wastelands without trouble. Threat level E. Good enough. In anticipation, I ordered the drones to dig through the west parts of the dungeon. Yes, I know. Where is west, east, north, and south here? How can I tell without seeing the sun? I can't. So what? My newest decree is that the entrance to the tunnel is to the south, and to the northeast is my core room, and to the west is the rattling warrens, at least as soon as my minions are managing to dig them through. I also sent them to the southern jail cell in order to expansion. My rattlings would need somebody to arm them after all, but it wasn't all that pressing a matter since there were no enemies to fight as of yet. In a fight of fancy, I created 4 more rattlings. Each of them looked a little bit different, like individual creatures, not machines, and ordered them to claim the nest in the warrens as soon as my drones finished their work. 2 more Libras were also made, but due to the nature, or rather lack of intelligence, I moved them towards the entrance and ordered them to guard it. And, most importantly, I sealed all of these little pathways that the grey rats were pouring into my dungeon, turning the dirt into sandstone, which is simply too much for their little claws and teeth. Now the only way to get in from the south was my mechanical men stood guard. And I could only wait. Drones weren't really adept at digging, but they did their job, eventually. And after that, I should probably took my dungeon in as a whole. I wasn't bothered by the lack of lighting, but some of my creations may be... Time for some decorating. End of chapter. Forgotten Dungeon, Chapter 7. I was going mad. These stupid drones getting through the prison wall was slowly driving me insane. Shing, 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 chick, ching, ching, and repeat ad nauseum. Metal clanging against stone again and again was unhinging. To escape from the boredom, I started to take stock of the already done work and things that I still needed to make or create. Most of my work orders were fulfilled. Western part of the dungeon was now 4 to 5 meters big room with a strange mound-like structure in the middle. It sported a new entrance and a different size, but the main parts of the structure were underground. I was staring at the unseen parts, and it was glorious. The network of tunnels and small rooms dotted pretty much entirely the current dungeon, and some of the area stretched outside. Normally, because of wasted and twisted manner, even my sight couldn't penetrate the outer darkness. And yet the rattling slowly nibbled on them, allowing me both their ken access. Still, singled out structure looked simply lonely, and I was about to change that. Firstly, I was thinking of adding some light to the rooms, both in this one and all the others. Secondly, I would like to force the invaders' hand and funnel them through the rattling warrens, because right now they could waltz straight into my core room and I would not be able to stop them. Because of that, I let my imagination flow. What is the first thought of you hearing the word light? As a human, or rather former human, from a highly civilized society, the answer was simple: a light bulb. My idea was to create something that could hang from the ceiling like a lamp, and I would prefer a plant or something of this kind. But since my material options were limited, I decided to go for something in between. As a base, I created a wooden line, short and thick, only 10 or so centimeters from the ceiling, and in the middle there was a small, pear-shaped fruit that had 2 bolts inside of it, and which was built on thin wires. Yes, I know iron was not ideal as a conductor, but until something like copper fell into my hands, I would have to work with what I had. And to that battery-like organ, located in its lower part, in the plant equivalent of roots, my chandelier was finished. Why chandeliers? Because I also made thinner lianas all around the central one, with only 2 bolts on their pointy end, and bent them in such a shape that if somebody wanted to take the fruit, my creation would snap shut like a bear trap, electrocuting and hitting unlucky brave and the process. This plant was also programmed by Anima to sway in the non-existent wind, thus creating shadows. Helpful to my other creatures, there were also some more disturbing changes. Using Analyze, I was able to confirm them. Electrical chandelier. The dungeon monster uses plant mimicry to look like a safe but bizarre source of light. It's mostly passive and feeding on local mana and maintaining its form, unless somebody gets foolish enough to try plucking the fruits that it sports. Not only such a person would get electrocuted, but also grabbed like a rogue-like appendages. In the unlikely situation that somebody manages to detach the chandelier fruit without much damage, it is possible to plant or recreate the accessories and weapons with the granted power over lightning. Threat level E++. I immediately planted one of them in every room and adding much needed light to the ceiling. After that, I sculpted tree roots from the available materials that I distributed amongst the free space. These were of course only roots, and I still couldn't get a hang of creating something truly alive. So no trees yet. I guess rattlings were an exception. And then I proceeded to see the geometric statues through the dungeon. With swaying shadows, one could easily think them enemies, and in some cases they were designed as such. It was time for the trap selection. Since most of my minions were either stupid or clumsy, I was hard to make something dangerous, but only for invaders. In the end, I settled on animating some of my statues, human-like shapes made from iron and wood, with large, oval heads without air or eyes, and thin, wire-like limbs. They were mostly just standing around, but some of them I put into poses. And this was a Dragzoon statue, triumphant statue, running away statue, begging statue, dancing statue, and so on. Each of them was designed to unnerve, but also accustom the invaders to their existence. A few had spear throws in their chests, cleverly hidden behind a mesh of wires. Some simply grabbed people who walked near them, trying to crush their opponents. Others were created to impale the enemies by hidden rusted spears. Hopefully, at least, my Libras would be sturdy enough to withstand them. On one of them, I kinda stumbled over the trap while I was making it in the tunnel, and that's why I prepared a clear road leading towards every room available. Thanks to that, the Libras and drones traversing it could actually get some work done. I also made sure that the road straight towards my core, and from the southern entrance, where I decided the digging will commence as soon as possible, was blocked, by using the stone and not my drones' hard work. When digging, they were capable, but building, nope. I made sure that they were sturdy enough to stop the invaders, and force them through the rattling warrens, in order to reach my core. I also started working on a new excavated southern eastern room. and I had a clear purpose in mind, but the materials and blueprints at hand were not enough yet. Instead, I did what I could, making wooden barrels and metal trunks, and filling some of them with additional labor clubs, rattling reserve spears, and some crude shields that I made after a moment of consideration. This would be a forge, or rather a machining room, as soon as I was able to create somebody or something to man it. Which would probably take some time. I mean, blueprints for sentience were gained after killing them, I think. Not like I killed any. These bodies were here when I arrived, Mr. Policeman. In a few minutes, more barrels and trunks appeared all over the dungeon, most of them empty, a few filled with traps, and even less with weapons. This time, I went out for simplicity, when it came to traps. I made two types, one which simply cut off the hand searching through the container, and the other which pierced it. Of course, if somebody was stupid enough to push the head inside, then the threat level moved towards lethal. I guess that means it is time to start digging towards my self-proclaimed entrance. My rats were already spied another room somewhere to the south, only a few meters, logically, considering that the underground complex was here before and I was only excavating it. The room itself looked more like a longish hallway, but to glean anything more from the rattlings was simply impossible. I should probably be grateful for any information at all. I am also pretty sure that there is nothing alive left in these rooms. Otherwise, my not-so-strong minions would get slaughtered right away. And in the worst-case scenario, something could even invade the tunnels in turn. But for now, I can only wait. Shing, 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 chick, shing, shing, and hope to keep my sanity. End of chapter. Forgotten Dungeon, Chapter 8. Uno. Contrary to popular belief, dungeon calls aren't all-knowing and all-seeing when it comes to their turf. Like I said before, I'm capable of bouncing my mana around the tunnels and rooms, and gives me the ability to see, give orders, and make something out of thin air. Why am I droning on about it? Well, right now I'm getting invaded, and I was notified, as the only one of the Libras retreated back into the territory after getting the stuffing kicked out of him. Can you imagine it? These stupid things getting tactical. After seeing my minion moving back into the broken toy, I made my mana bounce and ran, and not the correct word, sue me, towards the source of the commotion. After a minute, I was able to soak my surroundings, and it seemed that my drones managed to at least break down the wall of earth dividing my mini dungeon from the large hall to the south. At first glance, I could see that not much remained after the years of disrepair. Clearly, this room was part of some underground complex, and my closet guess would be that it was a food hall, seeing long tables and a large number of chairs strewn around, or other of the remains. There were also broken down tapestries which had depicted some long-lost heraldry, now brown and riddled with holes. There was also wooden poles, a metal pot which seemed like something used to light up a dreary place. The whole room was about 4 by 9 meters, with a ceiling high of 3 meters in most places, which in turn put it at about 100 cubic meters worth of space. And there was also 3 doors visible from the entrance, 1 on the right and 2 on the left. Surprisingly, my mana wasn't able to flow into this place. It just kept coming back by an unseen force. Former inhabitants of this room weren't really in a mood to talk. They instead chose to trade blows with my minions. Libras were keeping the guard over the new tunnel, smacking down anyone approaching with mirth, and I didn't know that they had it in them. Lively for half-undead, half-machine abominations. Rattlings, on the other hand, created small holes in the wall, high enough to shoot at the average male height, and pelted advancing enemies with spears. It wasn't very effective, though. Mostly because of our opposition was clearly undead, human skeletons clad in the remains of armor, with empty eyes and jerky movements. They slowly shuffled towards my minions and the entrance to the dungeon, while keeping absolute silence. It was creepy as hell. At least most of them were unarmed, using their stretched hands and weapons, and just a few of them were spotted with sword handles and small sticks that weren't really that hard to repel away. Pretty much every single one of them had the looks of a military personnel, and my analyze confirmed it. Bolzer Castle Skeleton. Well, no poor soul inhabits this husk that was once part of humanity's greatest army, created to stop the Northern Beast's invasion. After unjust death and accumulated resentment, it animated its bones and funneled rage towards the living beings. This undead is not intelligent and will move according to instinct, killing any living beings and devouring pure mana. It has a basic ability to use tools, and as an undead is an untiring abomination, destroying on sight must be for most sentient races. Due to accumulated damage, the threat rating has been lowered to E+. Even damage they're classified as E-rank threats. What? My Libras are putting them in the ground though, easily at that. Or are they? Now that I've taken a closer look, the only few of them stay down, and the rest just falls, scrambles up for a moment, and tries to get back up. At least, my side doesn't look to have stamina issues too. But, in a fit of panic, I created 3 more Libras and ordered them to move towards the battle. In the meantime, 2 of the doors in the food hall open up, and even more undead pour into them, joining the scuffle. These ones look, different. I wonder. Analyze. Waltzer Castle Civilian Skeleton. No soul inhabits this husk, but it was once one of the humans who sought after shelter in the northern fortress. It was unjustly slain and forced to walk these halls for an eternity. An accumulated resentment animated its bones and funneled rage towards any living being. This undead is not intelligent and will move according to instinct, killing any living beings and devouring pure mana. As undead, it is untiring abomination, destroying on sight by the most sentient races. Due to accumulated damage, the threat rating has been lowered. Threat level E. Oh, now I see the difference. These skeletons look like women, children, and unarmed men. Most of their flesh and clothes have already been turned to dust, but their movements and sizes are easy enough to differentiate, and it seems like I've stumbled onto a site of tragedy. But that's irrelevant. I don't stop them, then I will become a site of my tragedy. For now, the Libras are trading blows with the armored skeletons, and there are about 20 of them remaining, and about 30 civilians slowly advancing from behind. How did they even fit into these holes? Stopping them by the entrance of my dungeon are 2 Libras with more and running, rather than quickly stumbling as backup from my core room, and one of them is getting shields from my core room. And I feel that I create maybe 2 more, so without any further question, I do just that. Rattlings aren't really that useful in this situation, seeing that mostly only run to the force trauma, which is enough to keep the enemies down. But I can squeeze 1 more, seeing the overall cost is lower, raising their numbers to 6. But they can keep really shooting. Their spear's reserves are really near 0. So I herd them back to the forge room and order them to resupply. As my attention goes back to the battle, I see something jarring. A new Libras are wrestling enemies with the bare hands. You fools! In anger, I intercept 2 of the newest ones and force them towards the forge. In there, I order them to take only shields, as they are too heavy to use in conjunction with the metal clubs. And I can't really call them shields. They're just 6 blocks of iron with a handle hammered into one side. And they're square. Shaking my non-existent head, I force them back into the fight, commanding 2 unarmed fools to retreat and rearm. In the meantime, most of the enemies are already swarming my defenders. It's not that it matters anyway. In an undead versus undead battle, only total destruction matters, and that is what happens. One of the Libras takes the thick of it, swinging his mace and taking off heads with each move, until it overextends and gets tackled to the ground. I guess most living warriors would have panicked by now. Or maybe when losing an arm. And now a leg. Oh, it still tries to swing its weapon, collapsing the other enemies. And no appendages are left. Should I consider giving them mouths so that they can bite their enemies? I wonder. As I try to keep up with my fighting, my remaining Libras regroup and start to charge. With the shield bearers at front, it goes well. Maybe even too well, as they now are in the middle of the skeletons and thinning down the crowd. I think my victory is now assured. If not, for a small detail. These undead don't want to fight my warriors, and a few of them who are closest to the dungeon entrance started to walk inside. It feels gross. And all this decay and hatred, like somebody who's been dead for a month. I guess that is how my body was reeking, huh? No, it's not time for that, Uno. Focus. How many are coming? 8. Libras are too much in the thick of things, but I can always order them back with my rattlings. They move through the tunnels with uncanny speed, easily overtaking the slow skeletons. And then they shot a few times and working in tandem with my traps. 3 down, 5 to go. Damn, there are already rattling warrens. 2 of them get sniped by the leg-gnawing rodents, but 3 still remain. Damn, will I get eaten? Damn. And then I bounce back to see one of the most beautiful sights under the sun, or dungeon core light, whatever. The Libra who was healing near me was still there, and it has a club. I could catch you if I could. Attack! I relay my orders, and the only tactical Libra in existence charges forward, taking one of the skeletons apart. It then stops, bonking himself into the wall, but tries to continue the assault with a smooth motion. His club cleanly takes out the forward skeleton's head and smashes it into a ball against the closest wall. And the third invader tries to ignore my minion to go for the core. The Libra promptly catches it by the leg, and it jerks it with enough strength to force it undead airborne. With another jerk, it smashes the thing down. And then the undead is no more. That was terrifying. Positively terrifying. I need to up my game. And there is just some skeletons. What if something much stronger or more intelligent came? I would be a dead core, that's what. End of chapter. Forgotten Dungeon, Chapter 9. Uno. Now then, the first real invasion of my dungeon was taken care of. Somehow. The losses, 2 Libras, 2 arms, 2 legs, and a Libra of 2 ratlings. They've been replaced already, and I even made sure to repair the damaged Libra, so it wasn't worse or for wear. I was also one to make sure that my minions who defended my core stood watch there, permanently, and it was going to be my boss, if only in name, at least until I got my hands on some better materials to make maybe magical resources. Speaking of gains, I managed to get some common cotton cloth. Thankfully, I was able to remake it in pristine, non-rotten state, and I summoned a few times, just to make sure that the magic was working alright. You never know. And then I kind of left it as it was, and there was no real need for it. When my Libras had armor and the ratlings were made of metal, and yet the latter were abnormally interested in it, and their unspoken request was granted, and it fit my good mood. I summoned a few more pieces of white cloth. Ratlings squeaked in delight as they dragged them towards their tunnels. My other absorptions weren't really that noteworthy. 1 or 2 more types of wood, ash, rusted pig iron, and some different types of stones and statues. All interesting things like food, paper, glass, and such were long gone. And no magical items either. I guess even if they once were down there, time and undead presence destroyed them completely. Just my luck. On another note, as soon as the enemies were defeated, I managed to claim the food hall and 2 additional rooms to the civilian undead came. And there was also more rooms on the left of the dungeon for my entrance. But while the door was barely functional at some point in time, there was a cave-in. And that meant that my drones had to break through in order to expand, which I wasn't too keen on, at least for now. I was still continuing my earlier line of thought. To claim what remained of the castle dungeons and even lower levels of it were up for grabs. So just you wait, conveniently out of place room. But I was going to make some changes first. But the last battle taught me much. I needed to rework my traps, or rather add new ones. Skewering and cutting undead wasn't really working. True, and I might have contended with adventurers, but that was a future that I'll have to first survive to even experience. I dug a few pits and lined the surfaces with sharp metal spikes, or at least as sharp as I could make them, mostly to put in the bottlenecks. Fair play? Never heard of it. But leaving them open would be too stupid, even for the mindless undead. Instead, I opted for a bit of a manual touch. Above every pit, I put a sheet of metal and 2 rods, using long to keep it in place, and it added in a lever to one of the rattling tunnels running near it. With that, I only needed to give an order to pull the lever whenever somebody walked over it, and done. Of course, the metal looks mightily suspicious, and so I put freshly acquired cotton on top of it and covered the surface with dirt and ash. Flicking light from the chandeliers wasn't helping in spotting the discrepancy either. A few more rattlings were made too, enlarging their colony to about 23 individuals. With their own new trap duties, this must be a given. More Libras were added, now that I had 15 soldiers ready to defend me to the death. 1 of them was in the core room, and 2 in the future forge room, and 2 in each of the rooms attached to the food hall. And that left 8 of them standing between the statues just made in the food hall, just to screw with anybody walking in. The whole room was remade, with the central table and many chairs prepared. I even created small bowls and utensils from wood, and complemented the theme. Under the walls stood both my Libras and statues eerily similar to them. Of course, some of them had been tampered with, sporting either cutting or stabbing traps. And, add to that, my chandeliers and the whole spooky, creepy atmosphere was complete. No, focus, Luno, you're doing it again. Now for the most important change. I lied. I found copper. And that was a game changer for me. After all, I can use it to create wires and that can carry electrical impulses. What is more important, I hooked them up towards the electrical roots that I accidentally made, and then had a few changes to the traps allowing me to electrify some of them, just to add in an extra oomph. So then, on to the next plan. I was not omniscient in my dungeon, but that was going to change, because now I had copper, and, after a few dissections, knowledge of the rattling and Libra eye structure, so there was only one thing to do. Create cameras, that is. That part was easy. Connecting them through the wires laid to the ceiling was also easy. Putting one in each room and a long hallway, easy. And now for the mad scientist part. I was going to attach them to my core gem, my onyx, and since I didn't have any idea how to do it, I just went with the flow. This means that my core room now had a lot of copper wires hanging around from the ceiling, attached through small suckers to my gem. Now time to start the engine. And go. Yeah, oh, ow, ow, it hurts. Abort, abort, abort. Yeah, I need to. Darkness comes, I see. I must pay for my stupidity. Farewell, cruel world. Congratulations, your affinity has been changed to lightning. New affinity has been created, electricity. Your affinity has been changed to electricity. Thanks? The Gaynard Kingdom a few days later. Chambers of Charles Blueflame, High Paladin of the Order of the Fates Untold. Charles was a Blueflame of these Blueflames, and the third son of a noble, even an influential one. Position of the relic old order was all that his father could manage, and it didn't help that there wasn't any chance for promotion, because paladins were in charge of new dungeons, which there weren't any of, since the goddess said that 100 years ago, more or less. Their whole existence was obsolete, which he lamented over even now, sipping on his gold lyre tea and reading a book near the fireplace. It didn't help that the whole organization that he was in charge of, in reality, was a bunch of young, immature second and third sons of nobility stuffed in here, just to get them out of sight. Of course, he was here because of other reasons. It was all because of his older brothers grew jealous. He just knew that. In a few years, his flame would reach the famed blue level. Just you see. As he was enjoying his plans and faces of his brothers looking upon him with magnificent magic that his older butler, Adam, entered the room with all haste. "What has you so spooked, old man?" he asked while smiling. Little peasants always running around panicking, in a piece with the differentiated nobles from the masses. Our resident priest just received an oracle. A new dungeon was born in the northern reaches of the Hyron continent, and the location is yet not known. But we must move now, the old man shouted, and it was Charles's turn to panic. "What? How?" Goddess announced that there wouldn't be any changes. "Who are we to contend with God's wisdom?" asked the butler in a pious tone. Yeah, I guess. Get the recruits ready, prepare rations, wagons and weapons, and make sure that there is enough bottles of holy water and hired magical support. And for Freck's sake, don't let my brothers know." At once, master. The old man was clearly getting warmed up. After all, it was said that such a new dungeon was bound to be unique, and more importantly, it was a job that only the Order of Fates Untold was able to do. The Gainer Kingdom 5 hours later, in an undisclosed location. "So, you're saying that those pompous buffoons did get a prophecy from the goddess?" "Yes, your majesty. Our spies confirmed that they're already forming an expedition. What should we do? Arrest them?" A person clothed in a robe and a dark hood was kneeling before the throne. "No, it is their duty for once, and more importantly, you may not remember, but the dungeon exploration rarely goes without hitches. Let them try it first." "Oh, so we let them pull the chestnuts out of the fire then?" "Yes. After all, from what I've heard, it is just north of our borders. Somewhere around there. And it would take about a month to get to the vicinity, and then to search for it while battling undead. Let them do their work then. Your majesty is most wise. Flattery will get you nowhere, Hawk. I live to serve your majesty. Somehow, I doubt that. Just make sure that they take some of the soldiers with higher levels too. It would be a shame if the young Blue Flame were to perish just like that. It will be done. End of chapter. Forgotten Dungeon, Chapter 10. Uno. So, yeah, stuff happened, and now it seems that I have an electrical affinity. Not much changed, though, and I am still bumbled about what my dungeon plans. But there was a new innate ability, but I still wasn't sure what it really did. Status: Race Dungeon Core. Name Uno. Dungeon Level 0. Affinity Electricity. Element Anima. A location: Henrik Walzer, Ruined Castle. Magic None, Skills None. Innate abilities: Mana Sight, Anima Manipulation, and Electricity Encroachment. I had other problems. Those 2 rooms near the food hall were bugging me now. Empty and useless, so that won't do. I decided to make the first crack and take one just to the right of my former entrance. Since there were tables and chairs on the other room, I decided to remake it with this one as a kitchen. And of course, there weren't any edibles right now, not counting the stringy rat meat that I can now produce because of the earlier invaders. It was useless though, as none of my creatures needed feeding. Even ratlings were sampling electricity from the chandelier fruits or directly from the wires. It seemed like enough to sustain them. However, once I gained some true, living minions, I would have to feed them. As such, creating a kitchen space would be somewhat of an investment. First, I added a light source smaller than the other ones, but it's still as dangerous. After all, nobody cooks in darkness. Then a few tables and chairs and cupboards. I even created frying pans, dinner plates, forks and knives, although they were all very dull. And, in a fit of brilliance, false foods. In a container named salt, I put talc, and some with sugar, but using more crystallized stones. Then a slab of meat made from sandstone and colored to look just like the real thing. And just one more greens I remembered from Earth, like potatoes, carrots, cabbage and fruits, apples, oranges and strawberries. All made of stone. I would get to work out here as soon as I could get my hands on organic materials from outside. Then I would make my kitchen ingredients even more real, and maybe even create a cook to work in here. As a finishing touch, I added an electrical cooking stove, hooking up to the wires that now infiltrated every centimeter of the dungeon space, just like the tunnels of my ratlings. And the rest? Plans for the future, plans for the future. For now, there was a second room waiting attention. This one was a bit bigger, so I decided to use it as a sparring space. The 2 sources of light were attached to the ceiling after a moment, and I created a weapon and armor racks, and they were placed near the wall, standing opposite the entrance. And these, I put wooden versions of clubs, swords, and square shields. Yeah, I know it's not much, but yeah, this was still changing time. For now, I also summoned 2 more Libras and ordered them to spar. After mute discontent, I felt from the others the rotation system was put into place to get every single one of them a chance to fight. Thankfully, my minions were undead, so things like fatigue or boredom were beyond them, and as such, their bouts could continue until even the blackest of nights. Not like we had clocks or knowledge about time of the day in the dungeon. A few minutes later, a bout of ratlings found a way towards the sparring room and started to work as a judge. It started to stop fights and telling the undead who won and who lost the duel. It also asked me for a blackboard. I obliged, giving it a few pieces of chalk to write it on it and cotton rag. Now it looked more like a gambling room than a sparring room, but oh well, all's good as long as they're all lively. Speaking of lively, I can see that my drones are nearly finished making their tunnel and buried room on the east side. Once again, I sent some ratlings to scouts, but this time I took the reports with a pinch of salt. Nothing was moving just like before, and only opened the road towards the core would show with 100% accuracy if any undead were buried there. And then, probably another round of tower defense would commence. This time, I was ready though. I added 5 more Libras, raising the numbers to 22, and immediately ordered them to get armed in the forge room, and then they proceeded towards the excavation site, just in time as the tunnel was being breached, right, and stale mana from it mixed and fought with my own. After a chilling moment of waiting, the skeletons peacefully lying on the room stood up once, and armed to the teeth with their rusted coffs, plates, and chains, and their hands were weapons a little bit better state than the predecessors. Both swords, maces, and spears had been better times. Their heads turned like one towards the entrance and slow, but the sheer patter of the feet disturbed the silence. It has begun. Once again, undead started stumbling towards my core room. This time, however, I focused more on dealing with the damage than stopping them from walking. The result was already showing. Not one of the undead walking past my trapped hallway. Both ratlings and Libras were able to hurt them, so some of the crazes even destroyed the skeletons completely. The former taking out the legs and the latter simply bashing the fragile skulls. No disabled or hurt minions either, even though we had to use a new electric trap once, throwing the unsuspecting dead towards its doom with its full success. Everything was going fine until this thing appeared. A large humanoid in black armor, with its arms clasped and giant axe, and at least it moved slowly, but with each step the ground trembled. My forces pretty much eliminated all the opposition, so I ordered them to retreat towards the food hall. Pretty much all of my Libras were there, except the one in my core room. Rattlings too were ordered to help with the defense, and stood there in the tunnels ready to shoot, and behind them was what was that? Analyze. Iron Rattling Queen. Like most rat races, iron rattlings tend to breed uncontrollably when left to their own devices. Even the dungeon-spawned ones are no exception. It is such conditions that a queen are born. Tougher, bigger, and more intelligent than their brethren, and, most importantly, capable of giving birth to their own kind. This individual has the ability to command her subordinates and create new breeds of rattlings. Additionally, as one born in a dungeon with an uncommon affinity, it managed to feed on a few electrical fruits and gained power over lightning. Threat level E++. Oh, so that's why I had to plant some more of the chandeliers again. These cheeky... Then I suppose planting some more exotic plants would be good too, since one type of my minions thrives on devouring them. Crafting an ecosystem was always a fascinating idea, even if it came to life in the dungeon. The Rattling Queen looked really menacing right now, biting on something and wearing a cape made of cotton. It was white and not really all that well made, but making something, anything, without opposable thumbs was a challenge, and all respect was due. Also, I now noticed that she was chewing on and I was wondering where did the crippled Libra arms and legs go, and in the end I was forced to make them from scratch. I also used Analyze on the opponent and twitched in nervousness. Ironhide Undead Dark Knight, named Jailer Jonathan. When all was lost, Walter Castle soldiers decided to stay behind, in order to slow down their enemies, trading their lives for the safety of the civilians and their comrades. The sacrifice will be remembered. Jailer Jonathan was not one of them. He hid in the castle's dungeons, hoarding food and other supplies. This brought him a few months, but in the end he was reduced to cannibalizing his own prisoners and committing suicide. Because of such a past, he was bound to this form, forced to roam the halls of the castle with endless hunger and despair. Threat level D-. To reiterate, the Dark Knight stood at a height of 2.5 meters, and clad in black, dull armor, who seemed to devour even the light. Its helmet had 2 horns, one of them broken, leaving an impression of a tired old warrior. The eyes glowed in an unholy green light, adding an intimidation. But the real horror was beneath its eyes, the large mouth full of shark-like teeth, endlessly chewing and swallowing, even when there was nothing to eat. What's worse, it looked hungrily over at his own companions and minions too. The beast roared, taking a step forward and biting in one of the few skeletons which were left. The poor sod flailed for a moment until it was devoured by the hungry maw. In the next moment it jumped forward, landing in the middle of my Libras. They attacked immediately, stupidity making them immune to fear. Then one of them was grabbed by the arm and snacked down, while his companion smacked the attacker and his armored chest and thighs to no avail. It was then that one of the Libras jumped back and charged, and the rest soon followed. Their combined weight forced the being to shake and fall to its knees, crippled Libras still attacking with fervor. At that moment the Rattlings also decided to attack under the command of their queen. Spears flew through the air and mostly found their targets, as the Libras were pretty much immune to such attacks. Sadly, the Dark Knight was too. It shook again, and this time dislodged a few of the sticks that were chafing it, trying to remove not pain, but just discomfort. And then suddenly I realized that some of these spears were made out of pure metal, which was strange because I didn't recall making them at all. And then a flash of lightning, and my answer arrived. It was time for the queen to shine. As she gathered more than a few electrical fruits, let's just call them electro-pears, and threw them forward, adding a bit of guiding to her magic in the process, and it flew true, lodging itself onto the undead chest with a shocking both the enemy and the Libras surrounding it. What's more, the Dark Knight was thrown backwards, flying through the wall and into the kitchen area, and it sat beforehand. Just thinking about all of these small pieces that I would have to remake was giving me a headache. Focus, Uno. The enemy still lives. My forces gathered near the rubble, prepared for an attack, which never came. What I heard, because my camera was blocked by the cloud of dust, was the sound of chewing and swallowing. Crunch, 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 gulp, crunch. Again and again. Then the dust settled, and I was confirmed that the weirdest blue box ever. Jailer Jonathan wishes to join your dungeon. Do you accept? End of chapter. And that concludes today's episode of The Forgotten Dungeon. I hope that you enjoyed. If you'd like to support the channel, there are numerous ways to do so, all of which are listed below. But the easiest way would be to collect forgotten souls, create new dungeons, and force them to like and subscribe my videos. Alright, I hope you all have a good one, and I'll see you all in the next video.